Welcome to Dead Giveaway, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of playing giving. I'm your host, Matt Treadwell. Join me as I sit down with inspiring professionals who are shaping legacies and making a lasting impact, one gift at a time. Let's dig in.
I am Cherian Koshy. I'm the VP at KindSight.
Before we really dive into everything, can you tell me what were you doing before you got into philanthropy?
I was in high school making bad decisions.
Wait, so you got into philanthropy in college then?
Yeah, it was my very first job. My actual first job ever was at the Minnesota Zoo, but I was in food service, not in philanthropy. And then I graduated from high school and was looking for a job while I was going to college. And a friend of mine who I just knew from the community was like, hey, I think you'd be good at this. And it was being a fundraiser for the Sierra Club and for Human Rights Campaign. And I was like, okay, I can talk. Yeah, I'll do that. And so that was absolutely my first job out of high school.
Wow. Did you know at that time that you wanted to do philanthropy as a career, or
No,
it was just like, this is a cool job to do?
Yes. Like, I can do this job reasonably well. It's something, there are causes that I care about, like, all of those types of things. So it was like, if I can get paid to do something that I'm reasonably good at, sure, I'll do that.
Did you craft your major around that?
No, I was a poli-sci major and a philosophy minor. I thought I was going to go to law school because all of my friends are lawyers, or were at the time. I have more friends now. I mean, not many more, but to the point of almost every guy in my wedding party, almost all of my groomsmen were attorneys or are attorneys.
Okay.
So I thought I was going to go to law school. And then I saw my other friends go through it and I was like, nah, this is not a good idea. Not for me. And then kind of just fell backwards into positions that led me to say, all right, this is what I'm going to do.
When you graduated, were you then fully into philanthropy, or were you still not completely sure?
So I didn't graduate. And so the job that I was in took me to the East Coast for training. And at the time I was like, school is not working for me. And I was making some not wise decisions in general about life. And so I was like, I'm going to follow this and see where this goes. I became the state director of an organization in Connecticut and did that for a couple of years. Ended up coming back to Minnesota, thinking about one type of career. And a friend of mine became the executive director of a nonprofit, of an association, and said, hey, would you help me out with some of these things? And I was like, yeah, sure. I can do that. And so that led me on what would ultimately be almost a 10-year journey of then becoming their development director, moving from rural Wisconsin into Des Moines, Iowa, where I still am. And that's sort of the start of where I was like, I'm going to do this as a career.
Tell me a little bit more about that progression then. You said it was a 10-year journey of starting with that, growing into the development director. Like, what type of roles were there in between there? What positions? And how did you find your footing in philanthropy?
What was interesting, just out of high school into early kind of college, was that I found that I really liked talking to prospective or existing donors through that first role. Now, most of that first role was actually going door to door in the evening, talking to people about why they should donate to the Sierra Club on the mean streets of Minneapolis. And so you get rejected a lot, like of the 200 doors that we were supposed to knock on, you get rejected from about 175 of those right off the bat. So you sort of learn the sorting hat component of philanthropy really quickly. Like, not everybody's going to like you or what you stand for or what you do. And that's totally cool. But I was doing well enough in that role that they were like, hey, would you consider leading this office in Minneapolis as part of a kind of planned succession? And so I started leading the Minneapolis office, and they were like, we'd love for you to do some training and then take over the office in Connecticut. And so it's like, this is a cool opportunity to be an executive director, lead a small team, and lead an organization doing some really good work around environmental protection. And I was like, I see a trajectory here that would be worthwhile. And so I did that, as I said, for a few years. And as I think every one of your listeners can imagine, working with a small team, especially as young as I was, there's a lot that you don't know. And a lot of pressure around what you need to accomplish. And so at a certain point, I was like, this particular role was not the right thing for me at the time. And so I said that I would finish out like the next 6 months or so if they found another ED. And then I moved back to Minnesota to sort of figure out like what's my next step going to be without really a ton of planning. It was just like, I'm not sure where I'm going to go. And part of it could have been like go back to school, but it ultimately was very opportunistic in terms of a friend saying, hey, I think you'd be good at this. Would you consider doing that role? In that development director role, so specifically around community building and donor relationships and grant writing, because I knew that I didn't know, it was really important for me to find a mentor, to find someone to kind of help me navigate that. And so the organization asked Linda Liskowski to help with the development plan because it never had a development plan before. And Linda was so lovely. She was like, whenever you're traveling, go to an AFP chapter meeting. She would present at AFP chapters and ask me to like come with her to see that, and just would be like the phone a friend I needed to kind of navigate the space. And so I got involved in that AFP kind of fundraising community world super early on. And that's what drove me to be like, this is the lifelong career for me. I want to not only learn as much as I can, but figure out how to give back to these types of associations. So as I moved on from that organization into an arts organization, that's where I started dealing with more complex giving vehicles, more complex kind of donor expectations, got my CAP. I got my CFRE at the previous organization, got my CAP at DMPA, and also really jumped into planned giving as part of that approach. And so it was really just kind of the way that I think about my journey is I didn't have a plan, but I just started stacking on top of a foundation, like what's the next thing I need to know? And every year sort of having a specific additional thing that I'm going to do. I had in my head, like, I need to do some other thing to advance my understanding, my learning. And that's still true today, right? So like later this year, I'm going to go to the American College DAF certification program. So like every year there's something else that I sort of want to challenge myself, broaden my understanding, my knowledge, my ability to serve the philanthropic community.
I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier. You said that you were up at the executive director level and realized that that wasn't for you. I know it seems kind of hard sometimes as you're building your career to like take a step back. How did you come to that conclusion? And then like, what were some of the internal conflicts that you had? Because sometimes when you're like, hey, I'm going up, maybe I do need to take a step back to go find out exactly what's going next. That can seem daunting.
I will say that now, having done it several times, because there's bits of the story that I didn't include, making mistakes is my superpower. When I was a kid, particularly in high school and college, I felt like I could do anything and I could sort of like fake it until I make it type of thing. And I'll learn as much as I can and I'll work through some of these issues as I get to them. What I realized in that instance, and that was probably one of the biggest ones of being an ED and realizing there's so much more to this job that I am not actually prepared to do. I don't have the head knowledge to be able to do all of the different things. And frankly, I was too young to appreciate what that looked like from the outset. I was like, oh yeah, I can do this. And somebody said I'd be good at it. And I was like, I'm going to jump in. This could be really cool for me. And it's a great thing on my resume. I actually don't put it on my resume anymore because I don't think that while there's a title there, I couldn't in an interview point to something that I would want to highlight because I don't think I did a really great job. I didn't ruin anything, but at the same time, like there are so many components of that particular role that I wanted to honor, and I knew that I did not have the skill set to be able to do, nor the maturity to be able to do. So it really was at a certain point, this sort of repeated realization of like, I'm going outside of what I know to figure out how to solve a problem. And I'm doing that so much of the time that I'm not actually bringing what I know to the role. So that was the kind of overwhelming moment of being like, I need to step back and say, this particular role is not right for me at this time. And I'd love, at 20 something, I was like, I'd love to be in this role and do something more, be ready for that role in the future. how do I get to that again in a more prepared way?
You're saying that and I'm thinking like that takes a great understanding of yourself and like probably even a little bit of the ego hit to be like, I'm not the person for this. And then when you add, I believe you said it was one of your friends that said that you'd be good for that. So now it's like, oh man, I'm also maybe letting down a friend. That's just, there's a lot there. And it's very admirable that you could see that it wasn't right and you needed to take a step back because there's a lot that kind of rides on that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the biggest thing, and I mean, of the last few bosses that I've had before, I think they can attest to this, that I don't want to let someone down in a role. Like if I'm not the right, especially right now, like if I'm not the right person for that, I can tell pretty quickly and be like, listen, I want to make this as seamless as possible so that we're not going to disrupt the work of the organization or harm relationships. But I know like I'm not the right person for this particular role. And that is it's hard to see in the moment, like when you're applying for a role, it's because you just don't know what you don't know. But once you get into it, I feel like very quickly you get a sense of like, I'm in over my head. And having been fully under my head a few times, I can see how that can harm myself, the organization, the other people I work with. And the biggest lesson that I learned from that ED role was judgment over persistence. And I use this now as like a thing that I evaluate opportunities with and efforts that I work through is like, is this something where if I work harder at this thing, I can see results, I can get better at it in the near term? Or is it something where I need to quit early? So if you've read the book by Annie Duke, Quitters, it came out well after it would have been useful to me. But like it's a really good book of like we tend to say, I'm going to power through this, but nobody's really benefited by that sunk cost fallacy. So how can you just say like, let's part on better terms and get somebody else in the role that would be a better fit?
You mentioned a little bit that each year you wanted to learn something new. And that's when you added the CFRE and you added the cap. So when did you start getting more involved in playing giving and complex assets?
So in that role that I had at DMPA, that's where I mean, I had dealt with bequests before, but at DMPA, I started dealing with CRTs and CGAs, and they had some of that in place, but certainly not a robust system by any means. And that was where kind of the donor conversations led to me saying, I am again unprepared for some of these types of gift transactions. And there was also some real estate deals that we did as an organization where an individual could do, a bargain sale or a life income situation. Those are all things where I was like, oh, and I have some time during the pandemic to be able to do the cap. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Cap got me into then thinking, and so this is sort of like a spider web brainstorming type of thing where I got the cap, was able to close some pretty significant gifts as part of my then understanding of what that looked like and where donors were at the time, some of which have come to fruition now that I'm gone, and that's really cool. But in my cap reading, that's where and study groups and stuff like that, that's where I was like, oh, I'm sitting at the table as a philanthropic advisor, as a fundraiser. I'm curious about the fiduciary responsibilities, other side of the table when it comes to not just personal finances, but organizational finances and whatnot. That led me to then get my Series 65. And so that was sort of the next year thing and studying for, doing a bunch of Kaplan courses and whatnot. And my hope in doing that was that I could provide more comprehensive advice to organizations and to donors. And that's what kind of led me into that. And that's probably where I still would have doubled down had the AI software not materialized. So it just so happened that, that life said, nope, this is what we're going to do instead.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, cool.
It's crazy how life will do that to you sometimes.
Yeah.
Everyone knows you as like an AI person. When did you start to get the IT part of your development? Because they go hand in hand, right? So was there like a time when you're like, I'm going to get out of development, focus on IT? Was it a hobby? Like, how did that grow?
So when I came back from the East Coast and I was living in Minnesota, my friend was the executive director of the organization that he's still the ED of. He asked me to help with their community building, but also knew that I had like dabbled in some IT stuff. And so my first title, I think, was coordinator of technology or something like that. But it was not just, I mean, a lot of the work was, you know, fixing someone's printer or I make the joke. Well, I made the joke at the CGP conference. Like I'm fundraising old enough to remember having to get typewriter ribbon for donor records. Like that was a thing as part of this role. And then we moved to computers and printers as part of that transition. But it was also like an online community of alumni and donors that I was working with as part of that role. So I had dabbled a lot with WordPress and websites and things like that. I built out some of their technology tools with an eye towards how does this lend itself to engagement with prospective donors or existing donors and whatnot. That was super fun and I enjoyed that, but it really quickly, like within a short amount of time, transferred into we need you to help write some grants. We need you to then take responsibility over, because of that eye towards prospective and existing donors, it lent itself very quickly to then saying, okay, we want you to shift over to this focus because you have a sense of how to execute on that development plan. So that's always been sort of a little bit of a kind of nagging interest of mine. I had a computer when I was in middle school or high school and I was on bulletin boards when I was in middle school back in the day. Uh, so that was like, I know like most people are like, wait, what is that? But
Yeah, that was what
I,
my generation's chat rooms that we all
right,
we should not have been in, and we were
right.
because no one knew to stop us.
Yes. And I mean, yeah, it was totally new, and I spent a lot of time at Radio Shack and had a Tandy computer back then. But anyway, there's always been an element for me of how can technology enable and support the work of philanthropy. And so that led, of course, to me looking for solutions when there were challenges, like how can technology come alongside the work that we're doing to support the outcomes that we're looking for?
You're growing in your profession at the same time that you're also building some of this technology base. When did you start to come up with it was what nonprofit OS, right? That was
Yeah.
yeah. So how did that develop? How did you come up with that?
One of the biggest opportunities and I say this with all grace and humility, one of the greatest opportunities for innovation was the pandemic. I was working as the development director for a performing arts center here in Des Moines, for the Performing Arts Center. And so we had the misfortune of having to shut everything down. So there was no performances of any kind. And we wanted to stay in touch with our donors. We're all sitting at home and trying to figure out what does this world look like. And that gave me time. I joked that I had seen everything on Netflix. I had too many open bottles of wine. And I was like, this is not a good use of my time. What can I do that's actually productive? And so everyone was online. Everyone was helping one another, and especially in the technology community. And OpenAI had just come out with their API that allowed you to interact with it. So I was just using it for my own use case. I knew that at DMPA, we needed to do stuff. We had to lay off a bunch of staff. We couldn't use consultants or vendors. So how can I do some of the work myself without having to literally sit and type everything out? And built the tool to support our organization. And my team was like, oh, this is cool. This is pretty good. It got to a point where like we were using it pretty regularly. And then I showed it to some friends in the space who were also doing philanthropy work. And they're like, man, can it do this? Can it do that? And can you give us access? Can you make this available? And we're happy to pay for it. And suddenly, like sort of overnight, 200 customers all over the world, new customers all the time. And I started thinking, like, I built it. So all of this was sort of automated. I'm doing my work all day, every day. And then in the evenings, just kind of looking and seeing like what other feature requests are there that people have, and then building that. And then having conversations with technology companies around like, what can this be for? What could this look like as a partnership? How can we pull this together? And iWave was the first one to say, we want to have a conversation. And I truly thought if they're listening to this or they know this, but I truly thought that it was some sort of integration play that they'd be like, oh, we'd love to, connect the dots. And I was an iWave customer at the time. I was showing them how we were using iWave alongside Nonprofit OS. And I, when I had the conversation with their team, I thought that's where it was going to be. And then got a call one day and they were like, we'd like to buy the software and we'd like to buy you as well. And I was like, what now? That was not on my bingo card, and it was absolutely the right decision, the right fit, and so the rest is sort of history. But it's fascinating to think that of all of the technology companies that are out there, the ones that serve the nonprofit, plenty of things now, especially now in the AI space, in the generative AI space. The real advantage was that I came from industry and I was one of the first to market. And I think that's what drove a lot of these outcomes. So being a fundraiser who built a generative AI tool that marketed it and sold it to another company is certainly, I'm sure, the dream of a lot of people. The reality is that's going to happen for very few people, because I'm so cool and I built such a cool thing, but because the breadth of that technology now is like accessible to everyone. So the thing I keep talking about with my team at KindSight is there's some kid in their garage building something that's going to eat our lunch in 5 years. How do we be that person that will innovate and solve real problems for philanthropy professionals? And we've got cool ideas that we're working on, but it's not going to stop some kid from doing that. And I'm excited to see what that means.
When you were looking at the industry and creating the nonprofit OS, how did you realize that this was something that we could all use that wasn't already there? And like, what was your thought process? I know you said it was a lot of Netflix and wine, but like,
So I was curious about artificial intelligence well before this. When the API became available, now it had democratization to it, right? Like it was not super, super expensive to do certain things like build out an appeal or a proposal or an email or a social media text or something like that. What I did was really just look at what are all of our internal use cases. And I started with a handful and just said, like, can I build something that would address the immediate use cases that we're facing? Can I write an email to a donor that segmented? We had some existing segmentation that we had. Can I create versions of this content across those different segments that got me a first draft so that rather than waiting 5 days, within a few minutes, I have a first draft that I can finesse and then get out the door through our email platform. Once I saw that working, we looked at more and more use cases internally. But once I shared it with others, it really was community driven. I remember someone saying to me at a conference, once we started getting back in person, they were like, I write a lot of press releases. Can it write press releases? And I was like, sure, I'll have that ready for you next week. Like we can just keep building. And now everybody, this is well before Chat GPT. So now even in Chat GPT, you can do some of those pieces super easily. I tend to prefer Claude for writing purposes, but I think as now the platform that I built has evolved, we're looking well beyond what does ChatGPT or even Claude do into things like workflow automations and small language models. Those are where I would see the kind of cutting edge of the technology, not the bleeding edge. Like there's bleeding edge stuff that I truly don't think there are use cases for our sector, like not enough of a use case that it's worth investing in. There are use cases around workflow automations that solve operational issues that every single one of us address that we just don't need to, because for most of us, that's not where our gifting is. For most people, it's not in the how do I navigate the CRM reports to do these types of things or put these dots together. I want to be out talking to donors. So how do we empower those pieces through automation and AI?
community driven has to be very interesting. You know where you kind of want to go, right? But you're willing and open to going wherever the community says it needs to go. Is that something that you still bring to when you're developing? Because I'm guessing you're still constantly developing what you created. I know it went to iWave and now KindSight. Is that correct?
Yeah. So iWave purchased Nonprofit OS and they also purchased UCI innovation. And so rather than have like multiple logos and multiple brand names, we rebranded as KindSight. So all of those products still exist under the KindSight umbrella. And now what we're looking at is how do we consistently innovate in a way that fits within that umbrella, but truly serves the needs of the community. So there's absolutely an element of community building. Where I would say that differs today than where I was is that, again, making a bunch of mistakes is my superpower. I would say yes to anybody. Like if they said, this is what I need, I can build that and put that together and make it available. I didn't necessarily have an eye towards what was kind of the majority use case. What was the big use case? And how do we innovate especially now that we're thinking bigger about AI, how do we innovate in a beneficial and responsible way, as opposed to a way that would potentially undermine philanthropy in the long run? I would argue nothing that I built and what most people have built is doing active harm at this point, but there is technology out there that I do believe is creating active harm or foreseeable active harm. And that's where I worry about where AI could go if the nonprofit sector doesn't step up and say, this is our community standard of what is appropriate for use in the generosity of the community. So there are things that the example that I give all the time, and maybe you heard this or saw this at CGP, is around social media. We could have foreseen, and now we know for a fact that certain ways of using social media, access to social media early on, is harmful to people, bottom line. And that is unequivocally true of artificial intelligence as well. It's not that underlying technology, it's not social media is bad, but certain people, like my kids, accessing social media is 100% a problem. I would argue, just personally, in our home, this is how we do it. Accessing the internet at a certain point too early is a problem as well. Obviously, we're on the internet right now. The internet is bad, but for certain people at certain times and certain use cases, it is problematic. So how do we not only understand what the community needs, but also look at what the community might say they need and say, how does that impact what philanthropy will look like 20 years from now?
What are some indicators that you think would be that we're starting to go into that this is not the right use case? This could lead to the negative uses.
I am a big student of behavioral science. And so the term that I use is neuro fundraising. How do we understand what drives donor behavior and what drives donor behavior in a beneficial way, in a way that aligns with their identities, their personal mission, their values, and allows them to experience generosity in a way that's fulfilling? The number one example that I'll give you of where we can kind of predict problematic philanthropy is around gamification. If we attach rewards, and behavioral science is really good at this. That's why social media is what it is because of the dopamine hits that we get by notifications and likes and comments and those types of things that keep us on the platform and drive our decision to post certain things and our behaviors in interacting with that technology. We do not want philanthropy. I shouldn't say we. I do not want philanthropy to be gamified. I do not want it to be transactional. I don't want people to feel like there is a dopamine hit of that type around giving that is sort of like a Vegas casino approach, pumped full of oxygen and lights and dings, blah, blah. Like that's not what I see as the core of philanthropy. So people disagree with me, and that's totally fine. That's my view. And there are 100 different examples then of what that could look like in a problematic vein and where that can, and there's unavoidable elements of behavioral science, of neuro fundraising that we all do intentionally or unintentionally. So I think the big thing that I would say is being intentional about our neuro fundraising choices, leveraging artificial intelligence or any form of technology is the answer, the safeguard to what that looks like 20 years from now.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about avoiding the gamification of fundraising because you kind of have that a little bit with some bonus structures around it, right? Like that's a potential with or without AI that it could become gamified, and it's kind of on us as fundraisers to make sure that we aren't getting trapped into some of those things in general.
For sure. And I don't know that it would apply to most people, but there's a really, I think, fascinating book called The Tyranny of Metrics by Dr. Mueller. And it speaks about this element, not from a technology or AI perspective. I think there's room there for that discussion, but not in the text. And he's coming from an academic perspective, which is a good analog, right? Like if you're offering tenure to professors based upon certain activities, there's a very clear incentive to game the metrics, to do things in a way that solve that problem, such as publishing. If that's one of the metrics, then you know that you want to do that. And then that leads to, if we're talking then about technology, using technology in a way to skirt the system a little bit, right? And I would argue, again, this is just me, I would argue that the ethical challenges that we have faced as a sector and will face in the sector in the future will be circumscribed by how metrics and incentives drive fundraiser behavior. If you get a bonus for hitting a target, or like a financial target, or even like something around visits, are you incentivized to do the most, or are you incentivized to hit the bar, right? Does it make sense to short circuit a donor conversation to close a gift sooner, especially in plan giving? Like, does it make sense to take the money on the table, or does it make sense to align with what the donor really would benefit from, what they would really see as their legacy, even though that gift doesn't materialize for 7 years? That's the dilemma that could and probably does occur now, but gets amplified in the new world order.
That's a great point. And you mentioned earlier that you had the one mentor that took you to AFP meetings and speaking events. Was that the only mentor you had, or did you have other mentors? And how did you make those connections with those mentors?
Oh, great question. I've had a coach or a mentor ever since I was 14 years old.
Okay.
I currently have 3, which are, different parts of my business, brand, whatever, my speaking. And at every point in my career, I have done 2 things, which was advice that I got early on. So Linda was kind of an early on fundraising mentor to me. And then like after that, I've always taken the advice of one of my pastors said, always look up to a Paul and look out for a Timothy. And the analogy there is like having a mentor in your life that has been there, has done that, has provided some experience that can sort of like provide you with wisdom is super helpful. But at the same time, you also need to be looking out for people who can benefit from where you've been. So one of my coaches currently, Rory Vaden, says, you are best positioned to help the person you once were.
Okay.
That sort of lives rent free in my head. And it's really, really good advice. And so when I think about the mentors that I've had over the course of kind of my fundraising career, it has always been someone that I've seen and been impressed by, and I really want to sort of emulate. And I will reach out to them. I'll talk to them at a conference. I'll reach out to them via LinkedIn, start with a conversation and say, hey, I really appreciate what you do in the space. What I tried to do in terms of those entry points, if you will, is to say, is there something that I can do to help you? Is there something that I can offer in some way? And almost everyone has something that they sort of need, that they could benefit from or whatever. And so that's what I've kind of shared with folks. And then I'm always, as I mentioned, looking for folks who come up to me at conferences or reach out on LinkedIn and say, hey, can I have a conversation with you about X, Y, or Z? But I've been part of the AFP mentor program a couple of cycles, and I'm still really close to folks that I've been in partnership with for that program. I think any association that you're part of is a lot of people use it for networking for future job opportunities. Nothing wrong with that at all. But I think if you can see that as both the opportunity to get mentored and be a mentor, those are great ways of navigating like the exhibit hall or the conference room space, right? Like that's how I view those spaces.
That makes a lot of sense. You've mentioned that your superpower is making mistakes. What is a time that you've made a mistake or something went sideways or you failed? We talked a little bit about the whole ED role, but was there another something that you
Oh,
were like, oh, look, so many. I got stories
yeah.
for years on this.
You do not have the time, my friend. You do not have the time. So the one that I will share that I've shared before is I have a whole presentation on fundraising fail. The number one thing that sticks out to me is we were connected somehow to a billionaire family, like Forbes billionaire list. I'm not going to say the name because it's very recognizable. And it was the entire family that was connected. And so we got brought in by one of the kids to have this conversation with the family about a gift. And the mistake that I made, which I will absolutely never make again, is that I thought the kid was introducing us to the parents because the parents were the decision makers. And
Mm.
I didn't read the room or the conversation correctly. And it was actually the kid that was the decision maker. The kid was the advisor in the conversation. It was an entire family discussion. And so I focused all of my attention. I mean, bad fundraisers do this all the time where they're like, oh, I'm going to talk to one person and not realize that there are other people in the room. I didn't see it. And in retrospect, I should have had the awareness and wherewithal to be like, no, everyone's in the room for a reason. This is a family discussion. We're sitting at the dinner table for a reason. So they made a gift. It was like $50,000 or something like that. I mean, it was absolutely a fail because when you think about the potential of a billionaire family to have a long-term engagement with the organization, just leaving it at a one-time $50,000 gift and not really having that engagement was really a super miss.
Yeah. So how many people from your organization were with you when you went to this dinner?
It was me and the ED. So it was two of us, and I don't remember how many of them. But, in retrospect, I'm like, we got a $50,000 gift. I don't think anybody's mad or anything. Like the donors were not mad or upset or anything, but it was such a missed opportunity to think about. We had in that room the intergenerational play. We had the total attention of the billionaire parents and the kids. Like now, I mean, this has been 15, 20 years now. They are that next gen, and we could have had a 40, 50-year relationship with this family that they don't anymore.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that
Yeah, bad. I get it. No, you can say it. It's
no,
cool.
but I mean, it's still that just think about the numbers game though. That's always just so hard. Like you say bad fundraisers do this all the time. I think even good fundraisers do it from time to time where it's like you're in a room with more people that you can talk to and you say it's a mistake. There's definitely, like you said, probably more money to have been there, especially if the son was the advisor, but it's still those are just hard conversational pieces that we all kind of have to just grow into better.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, I think part of it, I talk a lot about short-termism and how we're just trying to get the ball over the net. In that circumstance, I went into that conversation with a predetermined outcome. I want to get a major gift from the dad. And how do I coax the conversation to get there as opposed to thinking about the big long-term picture? Like if I had thought about that as a 40, 50-year relationship that was intergenerational, which I would now in the future, I would have had an entirely different conversation,
Yeah.
an entirely different conversation.
Yeah. But is some of that just like knowing what you know now, more experience on how to handle that?
I mean, for sure, 2020 hindsight, yeah, I mean, absolutely. But I think part of the reason why I'm so dedicated to professional development of fundraisers in particular is that there is a way to see around corners. Some of us, and I don't mean I've been there, done that for everything, but like there is collective wisdom that we can draw upon so that maybe someone hears this and they're like, oh man, I haven't made that mistake, but I don't want to make the same mistake
Yeah.
he did.
Yeah.
And that's great. Like, please don't make the same mistakes I have. And I've got a whole long list of other ones avoid as well. But the more conversations like this that we have, whether it's on the podcast or at conferences, that's where I see the tremendous value in community and things like CGP is our ability to get in a room and see what people have done, what they've learned from. How do I take that and make that part of my own experience as well.
Hmm. And I guess one thing that I was curious about, and you don't have to talk about this if you don't want to. I think I mentioned to you before we started this, my son is in robotics.
Yeah.
One of the other kids that he's in robotics with is a parent that doesn't have a bachelor's degree, but she's been working in her field for like 20, 30 years. Based on your career, I'm guessing it hasn't had a negative impact that you didn't finish college. But have you found that to be something that has stopped progress from time to time, or has it not really been an issue? And clearly it's not now because you've done all these other things.
So there's another Annie Duke book called Thinking in Bets. And the analogy that she uses all the time is around the Seahawks in the Super Bowl. And I don't remember which one, but they decided to.
Not run Marshawn Lynch and throw it, and I didn't throw an interception.
So like everyone that has saw that Super Bowl knows exactly what that analogy looks like. But for many people who don't follow the sports balls, they don't get that analogy. Is like every fan would be like, you have got to run Marshawn Lynch. That is the winning play. And they decided to throw. And if you look at the math on that decision, the odds are that you win if you throw the ball. And so if you dispossess yourself from kind of your own bias around wanting Marshawn Lynch to run that ball, the data says otherwise. And so what I don't want people to come away from this discussion saying is, you don't have to get a bachelor's degree because look at him, he did fine. That's not the takeaway.
But I do find that, and one of my colleagues, Stacy Rickman, talked about this a lot, our mental models around hiring and how we may be closed-minded too much on what equals a good anything when we're hiring. He's had a career in a lot of different aspects of HR. And it's some of those things where like you look at an application that says, do you have a bachelor's degree? Are we disqualifying great people for those reasons?
Yeah. So actually, when I spoke at National Capital Plan Giving Day for their keynote, this is what I talked about, is are we excluding people, particularly in fundraising roles and gift planning roles, based on criteria like a bachelor's degree that really don't have a basis in determining, like, did you get a bachelor's degree in 1965? Like, why does that matter for the role that we're talking about? And so I do think there are role specific elements. And interesting enough, someone came up to me afterwards and she's like, I don't think I've ever told anyone up front that I don't have a bachelor's degree. But she had been, and I think you know who this person is, but she's like, I've not been open about it, but I don't have a bachelor's degree and I've been in gift planning for a really long time. So I think there's some people like that out there, and certainly people that have been excluded. And so what I would say is, while the result of the play for me has been okay, there were a lot of doors that were proactively closed along the way. A ton of them, jobs that I absolutely could not apply for because I didn't have the necessary requirements. And that's probably still true today. There are probably still, like, if I went somewhere and said like, hey, I don't have a BA, they may be like, yeah, we can't hire you. I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. I think I might be able to add value to what you're doing. But I would argue that for most organizations and most roles, having that artificial barrier isn't helping. And there's a diversity, equity, inclusion component of that, but also just a lived and learned experience component of that. Bachelor's degree plus 0 experience versus 5 years of experience and no bachelor's degree. Okay.
No, I agree. I find it to be an interesting conversation because there's so many life skills that translate and so many reasons why people don't finish. Like you said, there's the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion part of it, but then there's just the life part of it. And who are we missing out on because we have these arbitrary barriers?
Yeah.
So the last question I have for you, who in your phone right now would you love to hear on this podcast, and can you connect us?
Have you had Paul Casperson on? Paul is doing some really cool things. I don't know that you need me to connect you, but I'm happy to send him a text and be like, this is a thing.
Yeah.
This is fantastic. Thanks for having me on. It's really cool questions. I really enjoyed this.
Great. So glad to have you on. Thank you for joining us on Dead Giveaway, where every gift tells a story. A big thank you to Cherian Koshy for sharing his remarkable story. Join us next month when we sit down with Eddie Thompson, founder and CEO of Thompson & Associates. None of this would be possible without my amazing producer, Jessica Hall, and the support of the entire National Association of Charitable Gift Planners staff. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please share the show and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening to Dead Giveaway, where generosity lives on.